I took the job because I needed money, isolation, and the kind of employer that didn't care why a man had to start over fast. By the time I turned off the highway into western South Dakota, I had been awake too long and thinking too hard about the same mistake I'd been carrying for almost a year. One bad sign-off, one shortcut I should have checked again. A younger guy ended up burned, and even though nobody charged me with anything, my life split cleanly in two after that. Before, I had work. After, I had night jobs, short leases, and a habit of taking whatever paid enough to keep me moving. The road to the site cut through open prairie under a flat gray sky, all fence lines and frozen grass, and wind that shoved at the truck like it wanted me off it. There was nothing out there until there was. Chain link, white security lights, a low concrete structure crouched against the land, and a gate with a contractor sign bolted over something older. My headlights hit the metal at the right angle, and I caught the ghost of the original lettering underneath. Missile, Control, Squadron. That was the first moment I understood I had not taken a quiet maintenance job. I had taken a job at a place that used to matter for the end of the world. The man at the gate looked like he had spent half his life in prairie wind. Heavy tan coat, black cap, gloves worn shiny at the fingertips. He leaned down to my window and asked, "You Mercer?" "Cole Mercer." He looked past me at the duffel on the passenger seat and the toolbox in the back, like he was checking how long I planned to last. Then he checked his watch and said, "You're late." I glanced at the dash. I was 6 minutes early. He caught that and gave me a thin smile. "You'll get used to the way time works out here." That was my welcome. His name was Dan Lafferty, day supervisor. He buzzed the gate open and waved me through toward a low concrete access building half sunk into the ground. Nothing about it looked dramatic. That was what unsettled me. It looked like a dead facility that still expected people to report for work. Inside, the building smelled like heated dust, dry concrete, and old electrical air, the kind of smell places get when equipment stays powered long after anybody stops caring how old it is. The lobby was small and practical, gray floor, beige cinderblock walls, fluorescent lights with a weak, steady buzz. Dan moved fast, showing me the break room, supply closet, maintenance office, and a narrow desk where I'd log temperatures, alarms, and anything he called non-standard. I asked what counted as non-standard. He said, "You'll know it when you see it." I hated that answer on sight. Vague language was how people protected themselves after something went wrong. We passed a beige wall phone in the hall with a scratched metal plate relabeled in marker, Line 4. I asked if it still worked. Dan said, "Some do," and kept walking. That told me enough to keep noticing it. The stairwell took us underground, and the deeper we went, the more the place stopped feeling retired. Upstairs there had been wind pressing at the exterior doors and fluorescent buzz. Down below there was ventilation in the walls, a distant pump cycling on and off, relay clicks carrying through concrete, all of it steady enough to feel less like noise than a body at rest. Level 1 opened into a long corridor under pale overhead lights, steel doors set at even intervals, some with fresh contractor labels, others with older placards painted over badly enough that the original lettering still bled through. The floor had been recoated in epoxy. The walls were too clean for a ruin and too empty for an active site. Dan pointed out the mechanical room, panel station, sump board, and emergency shutoffs. Standard things, familiar things. Then we reached a freight elevator, with scratched steel doors and an amber call button glowing softly in the wall. I asked if it still ran. Dan looked at it a second too long. "Sometimes," he said. He handed me the rule sheet in the maintenance office like it was no stranger than the flashlight charger or spare radio battery. Laminated page, no logo, no date, just night procedures in plain black type. The first line read, "If any wall phone rings after 12:30 a.m., do not answer it." The second, "Never take the freight elevator below level 2. The third, "If you hear a countdown over the speaker system, stop where you are, keep your hands visible, and do not speak until it ends." I read those twice before I looked up. "This some kind of sight joke?" Dan said no, in the same tone a man might use to confirm the weather. I kept reading. I had trusted written procedure more than instinct ever since the accident last year. One shortcut, one sign-off. I should have checked harder, and somebody else paid for it. So even while part of me wanted to dismiss the page as contractor folklore, another part was already filing it as operational reality. The last two rules were worse. At 2:14 a.m., check the blast door indicator in corridor C. If it reads open, do not attempt to close it. Mark the time and wait 90 seconds before moving. Under that, if you meet a second maintenance man underground after 1 a.m., ask for his badge color before he speaks. If he gives a room number instead, walk away. I read that one again, slower. "How many maintenance guys are on nights?" I asked. "Usually one," Dan said. "Then why does that rule exist?" He had his truck keys in hand by then, already halfway turned toward the door. That bothered me more than if he had looked nervous. Nervous would have felt honest. Instead, he said, "Because that's how nights work here." I told him that was not an explanation. He nodded once. "No, but it's the part that matters." Then he left me the radio, the rule sheet, and a site that was suddenly a lot less simple than the job listing had made it sound. I spent the first hour doing what I always did in a new place, learning its rhythm before deciding what I thought of it. The boiler room was warm and louder than the rest of level 1, with 2 circulation pumps and an old backup unit that looked maintained mostly out of habit. The electrical panel readings were stable, corridor temperatures held steady. The sump monitor on level 2 flickered once and settled. I logged each number carefully in the binder and checked the previous 3 nights for comparison. The handwriting changed. The readings barely did. That should have been reassuring, but old facilities usually drifted somewhere. A sensor ran hot. A seal sweated. Something groaned louder in cold weather. Here, the numbers looked almost too clean, as if the logs had been made for review rather than truth. I stood in the maintenance office, flipping pages longer than I meant to, trying to decide whether I was seeing good upkeep or the kind of pattern people build when they don't want questions. At 12:37 a.m., I was on my second pass through level 1 when one of the wall phones rang. The sound hit the corridor so sharply that I stopped walking before I thought about it. Not a modern office chirp, a hard mechanical ring, old and clean, the kind of sound that made silence feel thinner afterward. It was the phone outside storage B, beige handset, metal cradle, no blinking light. I stood there with my flashlight in one hand and the rule sheet rising in my mind, word for word. If any wall phone rings after 12:30 a.m., do not answer it. Up close, the cord looked intact. The plastic wasn't dusty. Somebody had been maintaining it. I got near enough to lift the receiver if I wanted to. Instead, I waited. It didn't ring a second time. It just sat there in the quiet, like it had already gotten what it needed by making me come over. I stepped back without turning my back on it, and I did not like how natural that felt. A few minutes later, the overhead speaker system cracked awake with a burst of static, so dry it sounded like paper tearing somewhere inside the walls. Then a man's voice came through in a flat official tone that felt older than the contractor signs and newer than the concrete. "Stand by for." That was all. The line died there. No second message, no explanation. I stayed where I was and listened to the ventilation push air through the corridor. My first thought was old wiring. My second was that nobody had bothered to tell me what the countdown voice actually sounded like, which meant somebody had assumed that part would explain itself. I went back to the office and checked the emergency contact sheet, thinking there might be a number for comms or central systems. There wasn't. Just Dan, contractor dispatch, county emergency services, and one internal extension labeled Control. Handwritten and then crossed out so hard the paper had nearly torn through. At 2:14 a.m., I took my flashlight and went to Corridor C, because ignoring a written procedure on my first night felt dumber than following a strange one. The corridor sat farther out than the rest of Level 1 and felt older in a way I could not have measured. Colder air, dimmer fixtures, dust in the corners that the other hallways didn't have. Halfway down was a metal indicator box mounted beside a recessed steel door, thick enough to belong on a ship or in a vault. The newer label read Blast Door Status. I swept my light over the small glass window. Inside, faded mechanical lettering showed one word: open. I stood there longer than I meant to, waiting for a sound from the other side. Nothing came. Then, somewhere below my feet, deep enough that I felt it before I heard it, something heavy shifted once in the dark, like a locked system had just remembered how to move. I did not run when I felt that movement under Corridor C. I stayed where I was, flashlight fixed on the indicator box, and waited for whatever common sense wanted to call next. Another shift, another sound, a pressure release. Gee, maybe, but nothing followed. The steel door beside the indicator stayed shut. The corridor lights hummed softly overhead. The little glass window still read open, and I remembered the rule exactly as it had been written. Do not attempt to close it. Mark the time and wait 90 seconds before moving. So I checked my watch and stood there in the cold with my free hand hanging where I could see it, which made me feel ridiculous until I realized I had unconsciously obeyed the third rule too. When the 90 seconds passed, the indicator still showed open. I wrote the time in my pocket notebook, walked back to the office, and told myself the strange part of the night was probably over. I knew better than that even then. I got through the rest of the shift without another phone call or speaker message, but the sight did not settle into anything I would call normal. It kept finding small ways to stay in my head. A vent fan on level 2 that seemed to change speed when I stopped to listen. A door at the far end of a hall that looked closed from one angle and not fully latched from another. Twice I caught myself glancing toward the freight elevator, expecting to see the amber call light go dark. It never did. By the time the first gray hint of morning touched the narrow exterior windows upstairs, I had logged every reading, charged the radio, and convinced myself I had simply spent too many hours alone in an unfamiliar place. Dan came in a little after 6, with coffee in a paper cup and wind still in his coat. I told him the blast door indicator had read open at 2:14. He nodded once and asked if I had written the time down. I said yes. He drank his coffee and said, "Good." That was all. I almost pushed harder right there. Asked him what exactly had moved under the corridor, what the blast door protected, why a decommissioned missile site still had active indicators and working internal phones. But I had known men like Dan most of my life. Pushed them too early, and they shut down out of principle. So I kept it narrow. I asked how long the site had been under contractor management. He said, long enough. I asked if the elevator really reached a lower level. He looked at me over the rim of the coffee cup and said, "Everything here reaches lower than it should." Then he set the cup down, opened the log binder, and scanned my entries with more care than he had shown me at any point during orientation. When he got to the 2:14 note, his eyes stopped for a second. Not fear, recognition, like I had correctly completed a step in a process he expected to continue whether I understood it or not. That expression bothered me more on the drive back to town than the sound under Corridor C had. The motel I was staying in sat off the highway, outside a town small enough that the gas station, diner, and hardware store all shared the same block. My room smelled like old carpet cleaner and forced air heat. I showered, lay down fully intending to sleep, and instead stared at the ceiling, with the site still arranged in my mind, as clearly as if I were walking it. The hallway lengths, the painted-over signs, the way the voice over the speaker had cut off after 3 words, as if someone had unplugged a sentence. I kept circling the same point. Why were the rules procedural instead of cautionary? They did not say, "Report this," or "Contact supervision." They said, "Do not answer, do not speak, wait 90 seconds, walk away." That was not how people wrote about equipment faults. It was how they wrote about steps that had already gone wrong before. At some point, I slept anyway. I woke just before noon from a dream I could not fully remember, except for the feeling that somebody had been waiting for me to say one word out loud. That evening, the prairie looked even flatter than it had the night before, all pale sky and long brown grass, with the wind pressing low waves through the fields on both sides of the road. I stopped for gas and bought a coffee that tasted like burned paper, and kept driving west until the contractor sign rose out of the fading light again. I had told myself all day that I was going back because I needed the paycheck. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. Some part of me also wanted the site to become ordinary by repetition. Men like me trust routine because routine can sand the edges off a bad place. See the same corridor enough nights, hear the same pump cycle enough times, and eventually your nerves stop trying to make a story out of every sound. That was the theory, anyway. Dan was already inside when I arrived. He gave me a nod, asked if I had slept, and handed me the radio like the two of us had been working together for months instead of one shift. I started the night the same way as before. Boiler room, panel station, corridor temps, sump monitor, binder. Everything still looked too clean on paper. The previous shift entries were in Dan's narrow block handwriting, and halfway down one page I found an older note clipped behind the current log sheets. No date on the front, no name. Just a line in black pen. If line 4 rings once and stops, clear the hall. I turned the page over expecting more and found nothing. No signature, no explanation, not even a form heading. I stood in the office doorway with that note in my hand longer than I meant to. listening to the ventilation and the soft electrical hum under the walls. It was one thing to be given 5 strange rules on a laminated sheet. It was another to realize the site had grown smaller unofficial rules around them, as if the written version was only the part they were willing to admit existed. I folded the scrap and put it in my pocket before I talked myself out of it. Level 2 felt different from Level 1 in ways I could not have explained to an inspector, but noticed immediately as a worker. The ceilings were lower in places. The air was cooler and drier. The doors along the main corridor were heavier, with older hinges and deeper frames, like that part of the site had once expected pressure changes more serious than weather. I took readings from the panel station, checked a runoff sump near the far stairwell, and was writing the time in my notebook when I saw movement reflected in the dark safety glass of a door at the end of the hall. Just a shape crossing behind me where the corridor should have been empty. I turned at once. No one there. The hall stretched back under pale lights, quiet and still, with the freight elevator halfway down on the right, and the amber call button glowing. I stayed where I was long enough to make sure I had not simply caught my own motion in the glass. Then I went to the elevator and pressed one finger lightly against the steel door. It was cold, colder than the wall around it. At 12:43 a.m., the phone outside Storage B rang again. One sharp mechanical burst. Nothing after it. This time I was already moving before the sound finished echoing off the walls. The note in my pocket had changed the whole shape of it. If line 4 rings once and stops, clear the hall. I did not stop at the phone. I did not look closely at the cord or the receiver or any of the details that had tempted me the night before. I just kept walking until I reached the stairwell door and put concrete and steel between myself and the corridor. Then I stood there, breathing through my nose, feeling slightly stupid and slightly relieved. 30 seconds passed, maybe 40. Then, from somewhere above and behind the wall, the speaker system came alive with a dry crackle, and a calm male voice said, "Enable sequence pending." It was clearer this time. No static over the words, no interruption. I flattened one hand against the stairwell wall and kept the other visible in front of me without fully knowing why. The message did not repeat. It did not need to. I stayed in the stairwell until I was sure nothing else was coming, then returned to the office and checked every contact list again. Same numbers, same crossed-out control extension. I opened the binder and went deeper into the older pages this time, past the recent temperature logs and monthly maintenance summaries, until the handwriting changed, and the paper quality did too. Most of it was routine: moisture checks, filter replacements, battery tests. Then I found a sequence of entries from different years using the same odd wording. Unexpected ring, no pickup, hall cleared. Another, countdown event at 0:44, compliance maintained. Another, older still, indicator open at 2:14, no attempt made. Movement below, unresolved. I read those lines 3 times in the weak office light, my hand still resting on the binder ring. Whatever was happening at the site, it was not new, and it was not random. Men had been following the same rules here for years, maybe decades, and writing around the truth just enough to leave the pattern intact. At 2:14 a.m., I went back to Corridor C, with my flashlight already in my hand. and a pressure building low in my chest that felt a lot like the minute before bad news becomes official. The corridor was colder than the rest of level 1 again. Not freezer cold, just wrong enough that my skin noticed it under the work jacket. The blast door indicator box waited beside the recessed steel door, exactly where it had the night before. I swept the beam across the glass. Open, same as before. I checked my watch and began counting the 90 seconds in silence. Somewhere around 40, the freight elevator bell rang once in the distance. Around 60, I heard what sounded like a slow metal drag from deeper in the site, far below the floor. At 90, I turned to leave. That was when I saw it, a set of damp boot prints crossing the corridor behind me, fresh and dark against the pale epoxy, leading from the direction of the elevator toward the sealed door. There had been no one there when I walked in. I stood there with the flashlight fixed on the prints until my wrist started to ache. They were not muddy and they were not oily. They looked like plain water, darkening the epoxy in clean tread patterns that held their shape just long enough to feel recent. Work boots, standard size, nothing strange except where they began and where they ended. They started near the corridor mouth, as if someone had stepped into view from empty air, crossed behind me without a sound, and gone toward the blast door recess. I swung the beam to the steel door. Dry. To the wall. Dry. Back to the floor. The last print stopped a few feet short of the indicator box. Not faded, not trailing off. Just gone. I backed out of corridor C slower than I wanted to, keeping the light low and wide. By the time I reached the office, my first clean thought was not that I had seen something impossible. It was that somebody had known this could happen and had still called the job quiet. Dan came in a little after 6, carrying the same paper cup of coffee and the same expression that never quite qualified as awake. I did not ease into it this time. I told him about the prints, where they started, where they stopped, how there had been no one in the corridor before I saw them. He listened without interrupting, then asked one question. "You follow the 90 seconds?" I said yes. "You say anything while you were down there?" "No." "You touch the door?" "No." He nodded, set the coffee down, and opened the log binder. I watched him read my entry, flip back one page, then another, like he was checking my night against a pattern instead of against policy. "You did fine," he said. That irritated me enough to override caution. Fine for what? He looked at the damp spot my boots had left near the office door, then back at me. For staying employed. I asked him who had been making those prints. He closed the binder and said, "Don't go below 2. I drove back to town, angry enough to stay awake past sunrise. Anger helped more than fear. Fear scattered your attention. Anger kept it pointed. By the time I parked outside the motel, I had decided 2 things. First, Dan knew more than he was saying. Second, the rules were not superstition. They were a field manual written by people who had already learned the expensive version. I bought breakfast from the diner next door and ate it in the room with the TV off and the site binder notes turning over in my head. Compliance maintained. Movement below unresolved. Nobody wrote like that unless they were trying to preserve usable information without recording the part that would make them sound insane. I slept badly in pieces and woke around noon with the dry feeling of having dreamed in fluorescent light. Before heading back that night, I stopped at the town library because small towns keep local history the way old mechanics keep spare bolts, not organized but never truly thrown out. The library occupied a brick building that looked older than the county roads around it. Inside it smelled like paper, floor polish, and heat coming through old vents. The woman at the desk was in her 60s, reading glasses low on her nose, the kind of person who could tell whether you were local before you finished your first sentence. I told her I was doing contract work west of town and was trying to get a sense of the area. That was enough to make her look at me properly. When I mentioned the missile site, her face changed in a way so small another person might have missed it. Not surprise. Recognition mixed with a decision not to be helpful. She pointed me toward a local history shelf and said most of the military material was in old newspaper archives. I spent an hour reading clipped articles about construction contracts, security perimeters, fuel deliveries, closure ceremonies, and later redevelopment plans that never quite took. The language was all public-facing and dry. Then I found a short piece from the late 80s about a contractor fatality during below-grade maintenance. The cause section had been removed. That article did two things to me. It made the site feel less like a sealed mystery and more like a place with a paper trail. And it made me start wondering how much of that trail had been cleaned on purpose. Before I left, I asked the woman at the desk if there had ever been stories about the old missile facilities after decommissioning. She stacked 2 returned books before answering. There are stories about every old federal place in this part of the state. Anything specific to that one? She looked past me toward the window, where the sky had gone white with afternoon glare. Mostly about men who stayed too long. I asked what that meant. She gave me the kind of polite smile that ends conversations in small towns. It means contractors come and go. On the walk back to the truck, I told myself that was exactly the sort of answer people give when they have nothing real to say. Still, when I got behind the wheel, I sat there longer than usual before turning the key. That night, I reached the site just before dusk and found Dan in the office replacing the battery in one of the handheld radios. He did not ask where I had been all day. I did not tell him about the library. Whatever arrangement existed between us worked better if neither of us pretended this was normal. I took the night log, checked the previous shift entries, and found one new line in Dan's handwriting near the bottom of the page. If Corridor C is damp before 2:14, do not wait there early. No explanation, no mention of my prints from the night before. Just another unofficial rule grafted onto the official set. I looked up and asked, "How many of these are there?" Dan snapped the battery cover shut. Enough. Enough for what? He slid the radio across the desk to me. For getting through a night. His calm started to feel less like professionalism and more like habit formed under pressure. The kind men develop when panic has already failed them too many times to be useful. I changed the order of my rounds that night without meaning to admit I was doing it for emotional reasons. Boiler room first, then level 2, then the lower end of level 1, saving Corridor C for later, even though it made the route less efficient. I told myself I wanted more baseline data before the strange part started. The truth was simpler. I did not want to see damp prints in an empty hall before midnight. Level 2 was quiet when I got there. The air cooler and flatter than upstairs. I checked the runoff sump, logged panel readings, and paused outside a door with wired safety glass set into the upper half. The room beyond was dark. My flashlight hit only shelving and the edge of a folded cart. Then, just as I shifted the beam away, I caught what looked like a shoulder moving in the reflection on the glass. I turned hard. Empty corridor. The elevator down the hall gave a single metallic click, not loud enough to be a full cycle, just enough to sound like a latch being tested from the inside. I walked to the freight elevator slowly, feeling ridiculous and alert at the same time. Up close, the amber call button was still lit. The steel doors were shut. I put one hand against them again. Cold, same as before, but this time there was a faint vibration running through the metal. Not an active motor, not movement exactly, more like the afterfeel you get from heavy machinery somewhere in the same line. I crouched and looked at the seam near the floor. No light under the doors, no dampness, no sign the car had moved. When I straightened, the little floor indicator above the frame flickered once. It was old enough to have actual numbers behind smoked plastic instead of a digital display. For half a second, I saw two. Then the light shifted and showed nothing. I stood there long enough to make sure I had not imagined it. Behind me, from farther down the hall, a man's voice said, "What color's your badge?" I turned so fast, my shoulder hit the wall. There was a man standing near the corridor bend, where I should have had a clear line of sight if he had been there a second earlier. Maintenance jacket, work pants, flashlight hanging from one hand. At first glance, there was nothing dramatic about him, and that normality hit me harder than if he had looked wrong right away. He was built like half the contractors I had worked with in the past 10 years. Broad shoulders, tired posture, face partly shadowed by the angle of the hall light. But the rule sheet came into my head before anything else. If you meet a second maintenance man underground after 1 a.m., ask for his badge color before he speaks. If he gives a room number instead, walk away. I had failed the order by letting him speak first, and that landed in me like a dropped tool. He lifted his chin a little. "You in 12?" His voice was calm, almost conversational. I did not answer. I did not step toward him. I turned and started walking back the way I had come. I expected footsteps behind me. That was the worst part, not hearing them. The corridor stayed quiet, except for the soft hiss of ventilation and my own boots on the epoxy floor. I kept moving at the fastest pace I could manage without calling it a run. One hand visible in front of me, without fully understanding why that mattered now more than it had an hour earlier. At the stairwell door, I looked back. The hall was empty from end to end. No second man, no movement, just the freight elevator, the pale lights, and the old floor indicator dark above the door. I went straight to the office, shut the door, and stood there, breathing through my nose until the rush in my ears settled. Then I opened the binder and went hunting through older pages with a speed that felt less like research than self-defense. 20 minutes later, I found a line in cramped handwriting on a page dated 11 years earlier. Lower level contact attempted verbal redirect. No engagement. Subject used room assignment in place of ID. I sat back in the chair and understood something I had been avoiding. The rule had not been written for possibility. It had been written for recurrence. By the time Dan came in that morning, I had the binder open to 3 different years of entries, all saying the same thing in different language. Contact in lower corridor. Wrong response to identification. No engagement. Maintain distance. I did not bother easing him into it. I turned the binder toward him and tapped the oldest line with my finger. "How long has this been happening?" He looked down, read the page, and did not look surprised. Long enough. That's not an answer. It's the one you're getting. I asked him who the second maintenance man was supposed to be. Dan stared at the line a moment longer, then closed the binder with a flat hand. You start asking that question the wrong way, you won't make it through the week. I told him I had already made it through things worse than a bad contractor site. He looked at me then, really looked, and said, "That's exactly the kind of thinking this place likes." I slept badly and woke with the strong, stupid certainty that somebody had spoken in my motel room just before I opened my eyes. Not loud, not threatening, just close. A voice at the edge of a sentence. The room was empty except for the TV cabinet, the chair by the window, and my boots where I had left them near the heater. I sat up, rubbed both hands over my face, and told myself the sight was following me because I had spent 3 nights underground, listening too hard. Even so, I checked the room phone on the nightstand before I got in the shower. It was unplugged. I had not unplugged it the night before. I stood there with the cord in my hand a few seconds, trying to decide whether I had done it on autopilot, or whether that was the kind of question tired men start asking right before they become unreliable. On the drive back that evening, I kept hearing Dan's line in my head. That's exactly the kind of thinking this place likes. The wind was worse that night. It came hard over the open prairie, pushing dry grit across the access road and making the fence sing in little metallic shivers under the security lights. Dan was in the office when I came in, writing something in the binder. He tore out a yellow carbon copy from a maintenance pad and handed it to me without explanation. The work order was for a pressure irregularity tied to a utility chase on level 2. The location code at the bottom had been typed cleanly enough to stand out from the rest. L3 access landing. I looked up at him. "You told me not to go below 2. I did. Then why am I holding a work order for level 3? He took the paper back, read it once, and folded it in half. For the first time since I had met him, he looked openly tired. "You don't do anything a work order says until you confirm I wrote it. You didn't write this?" "No." He tore the page in half, then in half again, and dropped it into the trash. "If that turns up again, don't carry it around with you." That changed the whole shape of the night. Up to then, I had been dealing with rules attached to old systems, old voices, old patterns in the binder. A false work order meant something at the site could now use the same practical language I trusted most. It could generate instructions. It could imitate process. I started my rounds slower than usual, reading every label and check sheet twice before I put my name to anything. The boiler room readings held steady. The sump alarms were quiet. Panel voltages sat exactly where they should. On paper, it was the cleanest night I had seen yet. In person, it felt wrong from the start. The freight elevator call light was off for the first time since I arrived. Not broken, not flickering, just dark. I stood there a moment longer than I meant to, looking at the dead button and the steel doors, and had the uneasy sense that the site was not less active tonight. It was simply choosing different ways to show me where not to step. At 12:18 a.m., while I was in the office updating the log, the speaker system came alive without any warning static at all. The same calm male voice said, "Proceed to verification," clear as a man standing in the doorway. No distortion, no clipped ending. I froze, with my pen in my hand, and felt the back of my neck tighten. The rule only covered countdowns. It said nothing about direct instructions. That bothered me almost as much as the message itself. I set the pen down and waited. Nothing followed. Then I looked at the page in front of me and saw a line written across the bottom of my last entry in block letters that were close to mine, but not mine. Confirm below. I had not heard a chair scrape. I had not seen a hand move. 1 second the line was not there. The next it was. I tore the page out so hard the binder rings snapped together and stood up fast enough to hit my knee on the desk. When I looked back at the torn sheet, the words were still there. I took that page straight to Dan's desk upstairs, forgetting for a second that Dan was not there and would not be back until morning. The access office above ground was dark except for the little red standby light on the radio charger. I stood alone with the paper in my hand, breathing through my nose, angry in the way men get when fear feels too much like surrender. Then the landline on the wall behind the desk rang. One hard mechanical burst. I turned at once. Beige handset, coiled cord, metal plate beneath it with faded printed text under the contractor relabeling. Control priority. The phone did not ring a second time. The silence that followed had shape to it, like a held breath on the far end of a line. I remembered the unofficial note in the binder. If line 4 rings once and stops, clear the hall. I left the upstairs office immediately, taking the stairs down 2 at a time, and did not let myself look back until I was through the lower fire door. Level 2 felt occupied the rest of the night, even when it was empty. I do not mean haunted, in the lazy way people use the word for old places. I mean occupied the way a warehouse feels occupied after you've heard a forklift in the next aisle and know another worker is in there somewhere, just out of sight. Twice I heard a metal tap that sounded like a tool set down lightly on steel. Once I heard what could have been a boot heel pivoting on epoxy behind a closed door. Each time I stopped and listened, the sound stopped too. I found myself following the rules more carefully than before, not out of belief, but because disbelief had stopped helping. At 12:47, the freight elevator bell rang once, soft and distant. I was in the level 2 corridor and did not need to look to know the car had arrived with no one calling it. I kept both hands visible until the hush in the walls settled again, then turned slowly toward the elevator. The doors were open 3 inches. I should have walked away at once. Instead, I moved closer, one slow step at a time, until I could see the folded inner gate through the gap. There was no light inside the car, just a darker vertical space where there should have been an empty lift box. The doors were not opening wider. They were simply waiting. I stood there, listening for a motor hum, for chain noise, for any ordinary sign of a working elevator. Nothing. Then, from below the floor line, the calm speaker voice rose out of the shaft itself and said, "Verification requires 2. The words were not loud. That made them worse. They sounded directed, not broadcast. I backed away at once and kept backing away until my shoulder hit the opposite wall. The elevator doors closed with a soft, careful motion, like a person deciding there was still time to be polite. When I went near the panel a minute later, the floor indicator above the frame showed no number at all, only a dim blank glow behind the smoked plastic. I spent the next hour doing the most useful thing fear can sometimes force a man to do, thinking clearly. The sight was not just producing random manifestations. It wanted procedure. It wanted response. It used rules, work orders, labels, phones, voices, and old infrastructure language, because that was the shape of attention men like me gave most easily. Follow this. Confirm that. Proceed below. The realization sat in me with a slow, cold weight. Back in the office, I searched deeper into the older binders and found a clipped packet of incident summaries from years apart, all missing cover pages and signatures. One phrase repeated in 3 separate reports. Verbal handoff, not completed. Sequence did not advance. Another read. Subject responded to wrong prompt and was not seen again on surface until 6:12. I put that page down and stared at the wall a while. There are a lot of ways to frighten a man. Few work as well on me as finding out the thing I'm dealing with has a process. At 2:14 a.m., Corridor C was already colder than the rest of the level when I entered it. Not dramatically colder, just enough that the skin on my hands tightened under the work light. The blast door indicator still read open. I checked my watch and started the 90 seconds. Around 30, I heard what sounded like water dripping farther down the hall. Around 50, the freight elevator bell rang somewhere behind me. Around 70, a man's voice near my left shoulder said, very quietly, "You still in 12?" I did not turn. I did not answer. Every muscle in my back locked so hard it hurt. The rule sheet had not told me what to do if he came that close. It only said to walk away if he gave a room number instead of a badge color. So when the 90 seconds ended, I took one step forward, then another, keeping my eyes ahead. Something moved in my peripheral vision at the edge of the flashlight beam. When I reached the corridor mouth and finally looked back, the hall was empty except for a new line of wet boot prints starting beside the blast door recess and leading toward the freight elevator. By morning, I was too tired to feel brave and too invested to quit cleanly. That is a bad combination in any line of work. I drove back to the motel with the image of those wet prints fixed in my head, not because they were impossible, but because they behaved like evidence left by something that understood evidence. They appeared where I would see them. They crossed space at the exact moment a rule mattered most. They did not just frighten, they instructed. I slept in fragments again, and woke before noon with one thought already formed. The sight was trying to move me through a sequence, and every rule on that laminated sheet existed to keep me from helping it. Once I saw it that way, a lot of small things clicked into place. The false work order, the voice saying, "Proceed to verification," the old reports using phrases like verbal handoff and sequence did not advance. Whatever remained active under that prairie concrete did not need power alone. It needed participation. That evening, I did not go straight to the site. I stopped at a farm supply store outside town and bought a cheap spiral notebook, 2 black markers, and a pack of blue painter's tape. None of it made much practical sense, which probably meant I was finally thinking like a frightened man instead of a mechanic. Still, I wanted a way to leave myself notes that could not be quietly added to the official binder and could not be mistaken for older site language. On the drive west, the sky had the hard, clean look it gets before real cold settles in after dark. By the time I reached the gate, the first stars were already out over the prairie. Dan let me in and took one look at my face before saying, "You figure something out?" I said. "It wants responses." He did not ask what I meant. That silence was answer enough. I told him about the reports mentioning verbal handoff and sequence advance. He listened, then said, "Don't answer anything that sounds like a request." I asked him why he was still working there if he knew that much. He stood in the office doorway, with the outside wind moving lightly through his jacket, and took longer than usual to answer, because leaving isn't the same as being done with a place, he said. Then he looked at the binder on the desk, and because somebody has to keep the nights from slipping, I wanted him to unpack that. I wanted dates, names, explanations, a sentence that made the whole thing sound less insane. Instead, he pulled an old clipboard from the bottom drawer, flipped through a few blank forms, and handed me one yellowed page that had been folded into quarters so many times the edges were soft. It was not official company paperwork. It was older, typed, no letterhead. The line that mattered sat in the middle of the page. Do not complete any spoken acknowledgement below grade after 0000 hours. System logic appears to interpret personnel response as active continuity. I read that twice, then a third time. Dan said, "That's the closest thing to an explanation I've seen." I started the shift with the same checks as always, but my attention had changed. Before, I was trying to understand the site. Now, I was trying to avoid feeding it. The difference sounds small until you live inside it. On level 1, I taped one of my new handwritten notes inside the maintenance office cabinet. If I find instructions I don't remember writing, do not follow them. Another went into my pocket notebook in thick black marker. No spoken confirmation. The act itself steadied me. Men who work with systems believe in labels because labels create edges. The site had been using its own labels on me since night 1. I wanted some of mine in the mix. At 11:52 p.m., while I was logging corridor temperatures, the speaker clicked on and said, "Readiness check." I did not look up. I wrote the time beside it in my private notebook and kept my mouth closed. 10 seconds later, the wall phone outside the office rang once, then stopped. I shut the binder, took my flashlight, and cleared the hall without hesitation. At 12:16 a.m., I was on level 2, checking a panel station near the utility chase, when I found a new work order clipped to the board. Same contractor form, same machine-typed neatness, same location line as before, L3 access landing. Under task description it said, "Confirm moisture source below and report verbally." I stood there with the flashlight angled across the page and felt something inside me go very still. It was no longer trying to lure me with vague prompts. It was adapting. It had learned the shape of the rule I was following and had written around it. I took the form down, folded it once, and carried it back to the office without speaking. Under the desk sat the little metal trash can where Dan had torn up the last false order. I expected to drop this one in there. Instead, I opened my own notebook, wrote, "Found 0016 level 2 panel board," taped the work order inside, and put the notebook in my duffel. If the site wanted process, I was going to start building a process against it. A little after 12:40, the freight elevator bell rang once. I was already in the office and could see the far end of the corridor from where I sat. The amber call light had come back on at some point without my noticing. It glowed softly against the wall, patient as a cigarette in the dark. Then the elevator doors opened on their own, not all the way, just enough to reveal the folded inner gate and a strip of darkness behind it. I stayed seated, both hands visible on the desk, and watched. 30 seconds passed. Then a man's voice came from the corridor, not from the shaft this time, but from the office doorway behind me. "Cole." I shut my eyes once before turning. No one there. The voice had used my name in the tone of a coworker trying not to spook another man on a ladder. Familiar, practical, careful, exactly the kind of tone I would have trusted a year ago without thinking. When I faced the corridor again, the elevator doors were fully open, and there were wet prints leading out of the car toward the office. I did not follow the prints. That took more effort than I like admitting. Curiosity is not the opposite of fear. Most nights, it is just fear with better posture. I stayed behind the desk and watched the dark tread marks approach the threshold, stop just outside the office, and dry there slowly in the moving air. No one crossed in. No figure appeared. The sight had brought the evidence to me now, the way a person slides a document across a table to force acknowledgement. My radio crackled once and filled with static. Then, a man I had never heard before said very clearly, "Second key, ready." The transmission cut out. I reached for the radio on reflex and stopped with my fingers hovering over it. The old typed memo flashed in my mind. System logic appears to interpret personnel response as active continuity. I pulled my hand back. A minute later, the wall phone outside the office rang twice in quick succession instead of once. That had not happened before. I found that more disturbing than if everything had stayed the same. The binder gave me the next piece just after 1 a.m. I had gone searching for any note about second key, expecting nothing. Instead, I found a clipped summary page from the late 90s with half the top section missing. The surviving lines were enough. Below-grade logic appears incomplete but persistent. Sequence language references dual confirmation protocol. Missing personnel may have been interpreted as absent command presence. Subsequent events strongly suggest site seeks substitution rather than restoration. I read the phrase seeks substitution 3 times. Then I sat back and looked around the little office as if the walls had shifted. It was not trying to bring back whoever once belonged there. It was trying to fill empty positions in an old process, using whoever was available now. That explained the second maintenance man better than any ghost theory would have. Not a dead coworker, not a haunting with a face. A role, a placeholder, a moving part shaped like a person because the original system had been built to require one. At 1:38 a.m., the speaker system came on everywhere at once, not just the corridor overheads, the office ceiling speaker, the hall unit by storage B, the crackling line above the stairwell, all of them alive together in the same dry, official voice. Stand by for final verification window. I went cold, all through my arms. It was the most complete message yet. Then the site did something new. Every panel light in the office dimmed together for half a second and came back brighter. Down the hall, the freight elevator bell rang. Once, twice, 3 times. I stood up carefully, keeping my breathing even, and looked through the office doorway. The elevator doors were open again. In the darkness beyond the gate, something pale caught the light and vanished. Not movement exactly, more like a face turning past the gap at the wrong speed for a human body. The voice returned, lower now, almost intimate through the office speaker, awaiting acknowledgement. I put both hands flat on the desk and said nothing. At 2:14 a.m., I went to Corridor C because by then I understood something that mattered more than fear. The site's strongest moments clustered around the same checkpoints. If there was a place to break its rhythm, it would be where its rhythm was most rigid. The corridor was colder than ever. and the blast door indicator still read open. I checked my watch and began the 90 seconds. At 20, the speaker said, "Continuity degraded." At 40, I heard the second maintenance man breathing somewhere behind me, close enough that the hairs on my neck lifted. At 60, a voice I knew too well said my name from the blast door recess itself. Not Dan, not the site voice, the younger mechanic from Nebraska, the one I had failed. His tone was exactly as I remembered it from the shop floor the morning before the accident. Tired, respectful, asking for help without wanting to sound weak. My mouth opened before I caught it. I shut it hard enough to hurt my teeth. At 90, the lights in Corridor C dropped to near darkness, and something heavy below us struck once against metal like a whole buried system had just missed a step. I stayed in Corridor C a few seconds after the impact below, not because I was brave, but because my legs had gone tight and useless under me. The lights slowly rose back from near darkness to their old, weak, industrial glow. The blast door indicator still read open. Nothing in the corridor moved, nothing spoke, but I knew the moment had mattered. The site had expected an answer and had not gotten one. Back in the office, every panel light was still brighter than normal, and the radio was giving off a low wash of static like distant surf. I opened my notebook, wrote "no response" at 2:14/heavy impact below, and underlined it twice. Then I added the first clean conclusion I had been able to state in plain English since arriving. Silence interrupts sequence. Writing that down steadied me more than it should have. Men like me believe a thing more when it survives being written. I did not know if silence could stop the site completely. I knew now that it could make it miss a step. Dan came in just after 6 and found me at the desk with the notebook open and 3 older reports spread around it, like evidence in a case nobody wanted. I told him what had happened in Corridor C. I told him about the voice from Nebraska and how close I had come to answering it. That last part was harder to say than the rest. Shame makes a man lower his eyes faster than fear does. Dan listened the way he always listened. Too still, too little expression, no wasted sympathy. When I finished, he asked, "Did it sound exact?" I said yes. He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something he already suspected. "It doesn't just repeat old material," he said. "It uses whatever gets the nearest response." I asked him whether anyone had ever shut it down for good. He looked toward the hallway, not at me. "If they had, you wouldn't be working there." Then he took the notebook, read the line about silence interrupting sequence, and said, "That's the first useful new thing I've heard in years." I should have left then. I had enough already to quit, drive east, and spend the rest of my life not answering unknown calls after midnight. But bad places create their own kind of obligation, especially when you start to understand their logic. If I left without knowing whether the sequence could be broken cleanly, the site would keep running nights on whoever took the job after me. Another contractor, another man short on money, and long on reasons not to ask questions. I did not dress that up as heroism. It was partly guilt, and partly anger, and partly the simple mechanic's instinct that if you finally understand what is wrong in a system, walking away before testing the fix feels like failure. I spent the day at the motel making a list in thick black marker on one of the new notebook pages. No response, no following voices, no elevator. Corridor C at 2:14. Beneath that, I wrote one more line and stared at it for a while before closing the book. Do not let it turn regret into procedure. When I came in that evening, the sight felt wrong before I even reached the stairwell. The lobby lights were brighter. The air upstairs had that metallic dry smell the lower levels usually carried, as if something buried had started breathing through the whole structure instead of keeping to itself. Dan was waiting in the office with a ring of old keys on the desk beside him, heavy steel ones with stamped number tags darkened by age. "These don't open much anymore," he said, "but one of them still opens the records cage on level 1. I asked why that mattered now. He said, "Because if this is going where I think it is, you should know what it originally wanted." We took the key and went down together for the first time since I started. The records cage sat behind a wire partition near the far end of level 1, locked with an old padlock that took 3 tries before the tumblers gave. Inside were shelves of binders, outdated maps, and typed emergency packets, yellowed at the edges. Dan pulled one thin folder and handed it to me. The tab read, "Continuity Verification, Crew Loss Contingency." We read standing up in the cage, under one weak overhead bulb. Most of the folder was technical language about below-grade staffing, redundant authorizations, and command continuity in the event of severed surface contact. Then, buried halfway through, I found the line that made the rest of it snap into place. In the absence of confirmed paired personnel, incomplete verification states may recur until valid acknowledgement, substitute presence, or formal system death is achieved. I read that twice, then once more out loud in my head without moving my lips. Substitute presence. That was the second maintenance man. That was the voice from Nebraska. That was every prompt, every fake work order, every request to proceed below. The site was not alive in any human sense. It was trapped in an unfinished readiness state and had spent decades trying to fill missing positions with whatever minds and bodies were nearest. I looked at Dan and said, "Formal system death. Can that still happen?" He answered too fast for me to feel good about it. Maybe. Then the speaker above us crackled and said, perfectly clear, "Both parties report below grade." Dan and I froze at the same time. That startled me almost as much as the message itself. Until then, I had half believed his calm came from distance. Seeing him lock up in that cage, under the weak light, told me the sight could still reach him too. He recovered first. "We're done reading," he said, and took the folder from my hands. We stepped out into the corridor, and the freight elevator bell rang somewhere down the hall with a bright, almost cheerful sound I had never heard from it before. Dan swore under his breath. We moved back toward the office at a fast walk, not running, both of us obeying the same old worker reflex that panic should never make more problems than it solves. As we rounded the corridor bend, I saw the elevator doors already standing open. 2 wet tracks led out across the epoxy floor, side by side, as if 2 men had stepped from the car together. Dan stopped hard enough that I nearly hit him. Then he said the first openly frightened thing I had heard from him. It hasn't done that before. Back in the office, the whole site felt electrically awake. Not louder exactly, sharper. The panel lights held steady, but too bright. The radio static rose and fell like breathing. Somewhere far below, metal was moving in slow, deliberate intervals, not the random settling sounds of old infrastructure, but repeated mechanical work. The speaker came on again. Verification window open, awaiting key acknowledgement. Dan opened a lower drawer and took out a sealed envelope I had never seen. Inside was a typed note and a small brass key on a tag marked Manual Override. See corridor. I always hoped this was outdated, he said. The typed note was brief. If substitute logic persists, interrupt final check by withholding acknowledgement at open indicator and engaging manual override only after sequence stalls. Do not engage while prompts remain active. I looked from the note to the key. So that's formal system death? Dan gave the smallest shake of his head, or the closest anybody got. Then the office phone rang once, and from the hallway, a familiar voice called my name in the careful tone of the burned mechanic from Nebraska. I took the brass key and went to Corridor C alone, because 2 men were more useful to the site than 1. By then, I knew the site had been pushing toward the same shape all week, a paired response. If Dan walked down that corridor with me, it would not be backup. It would be compliance. Dan stayed in the office with the old typed instruction in front of him and strict orders not to follow me unless the speakers went dead. By the time I reached the corridor, the air had changed. Not colder exactly, thinner, like the concrete itself was holding a breath. The blast door indicator still showed open. My watch read 2:14. Then the voices started, not in a rush, but one at a time, chosen carefully. The younger mechanic from Nebraska asking if I could come look at the line again. Dan calling from somewhere behind the door, saying he needed a second set of hands. Then the second maintenance man close at my right shoulder, calm as ever. You still in 12? I kept both hands visible and my mouth shut. At 30 seconds, the overhead speaker said, "Substitute presence accepted." At 60, something hit the underside of the floor so hard the corridor lights pulsed white. At 80, a second voice came through the speaker in my own voice, clear and tired and obedient, ready to confirm. That was the closest I came to breaking, hearing my own voice down there, shaped exactly the way I sound when I've stopped arguing with a bad decision, hit harder than the Nebraska voice ever could. For 1 second, I saw the whole trap clearly, not just a dead system asking for acknowledgement, but a process that had spent decades learning how men give themselves away. My watch ticked over the 90 seconds. The corridor went silent all at once. No breathing behind me, no voices, no movement below. Just a pause, so complete it felt prepared. I waited 1 more beat to make sure the prompts were done, then jammed the brass key into the painted-over slot under the indicator box and turned it hard. Deep under the sight, something enormous engaged with a violence I felt through my boots. Locks slammed, relays dropped, vent fans wound down in staggered layers. The blast door indicator flickered, blurred, and went from open to dead. Then, just before the corridor lights settled, the speaker above me crackled 1 last time and said, in my own voice, "Continuity relocated." By daylight, the site felt empty in a way it never had before. Not safe, just emptied out. The freight elevator call light was dark. The wall phone outside storage B sat dead in its cradle. Corridor C smelled like cold metal and old dust, with none of the strange tension that had clung to it every night before. Dan looked at the indicator, saw dead behind the little glass, and did not say much. Men like him save words for things they expect to survive language. I quit before noon, turned in the radio, signed the contractor form, and left South Dakota with my duffel, my toolbox, and the private notebook taped shut beside me on the passenger seat. For a while, that looked like the end of it. 3 months later, I was alone in a machine shop outside Omaha, finishing a late repair, when the old beige wall phone by the parts cabinet rang. Once, I froze and kept both hands where I could see them. I did not answer. The phone stayed silent. Then the dead overhead speaker above the roll-up door hissed softly and, in my own voice, said, "Stand by for final verification." When the city sleeps, it notices who doesn't.